here. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an automated, it pops up every once in a while. And it comes in very, very handy for our internal meetings, but not so much for our external meetings. So thank you.
Of course, agreed. AI has been a great ally. Sometimes AI decides that it's more on the I side than I am and wants to take over the meetings.
Yeah.
So understood. And just in case anyone's noticing, Elizabeth, on that note, you'll see on the screen Confluence Note Taker. We do use an AI note taker. It's nothing that we share publicly. Carrie, as you all know, probably takes 50 pages of notes per hour. She also has that AI that helps us pull some themes out of here. Hillary, it is great to have you on. We'll probably have you do an intro in just a minute. With Hillary, we now have Hillary, Michael, the Lieutenant Governor, and Elizabeth on. We are getting closer and closer to a quorum. This is me kind of buying us time in that ever-ending hope for that. I'm going to go ahead and start. I want to respect everyone's time, so I'll go through some of the administrative rituals you are used to hearing me go through. This is Barrick Abramson with Confluence Policy and Strategy Group, here to facilitate the amazing work of the 1296 Task Force on the Rights of Coloradans with Disabilities. A few norms we ask folks to follow. If you're a member of the of the task force, and you are in a place where it is safe and comfortable for you to do so, we'd love to have you on camera. We understand that's not always the case. Members of the public and other support staff who are joining, we do ask you to leave your cameras off until you're invited into the conversation. That's simply a way of making sure that our members can focus on the conversation between one another. Final two things. We ask folks to refrain from using the chat. Occasionally, I use it, and I veto my own rules if we need to get something urgently to the members, or if there's something urgent you need to communicate to me. But we ask folks not to engage in conversation in the chat. It can be distracting for everyone, and it's particularly distracting for anyone using a screen reader when that starts popping up in the background. Finally, what I'll ask is that when you speak for the first time members, I'll ask you to introduce yourself by full name in either the organization or constituency you represent, and going forward, just that you introduce yourself by name. We've got this group joined on the Zoom. We're also live streaming on Zoom, or excuse me, on YouTube, and folks will be listening to this later. So we want to make sure folks know who is talking. You're hearing me draw this out because I'm hoping we get a quorum. As a reminder, some of the things that you all decided, we had a conversation early in the spring, and the general indication, although it was not a formal vote, at that time was you wanted to give deference to the recommendations of the subcommittee. That didn't mean you were bound to them, but you wanted to give some deference because this is a group of 40 plus folks that have been working together, really digging deep into this for the past year. That said, the legislation is very specific in saying you have the right to act on or not act on any of the recommendations that you receive. So this is really now in the hands of the executive committee. One thing you did all decide when we did have a quorum was that the decision to advance recommendations would be by a simple majority, so 50% plus one, and that any dissenting opinions would have the right to include that perspective included in the report. It's the same approach we took on the subcommittee recommendations that you all received. All of those where anybody wanted to share their opinion on a dissenting opinion, they did. You probably saw in there we do have one, particularly as it relates to some issues relating to the ski industry. So we wanted to make sure that was heard and offered there. I got a question of whether we're going to offer public comment. I'm going to be very direct with all of you. We have a lot to get through. I told all of you early on when we started working together, there were really two big influences in my life. My formative years in Hawaii and the spirit of aloha, and the United States Marines that helped shape me. So far, it's been a lot of the aloha. Now we're getting into where things are going to have to get a little more structured. We're going to have to move through these. I know a lot of you have been particularly busy coming out of the Thanksgiving holiday and did not have an opportunity to complete the survey we sent around. If you didn't get it, flag that to Carrie and me. For each of these meetings, we are sending around in advance a survey that contains each of the ideas, the recommendations from the subcommittees. The reason we're doing that is not to tally a vote, but we have 55 recommendations to work through in our 4 meetings. My intention is to make as efficient a use of time as possible. So when you complete that survey and tell me either I support this idea either as is or with very minor revisions. I know we're going to be able to move through that one pretty quickly. If you tell me on the other side, this one needs significant revisions, that's where we're going to allocate time. Full transparency, we only had 2 people respond to the survey this time, which means we're going to be doing some work to get through these today. I'm not going to falsely promise you we're going to get through all of them today because I want to respect whatever discussion you all want to have. What I am going to do, and this is where the Marine is going to come out. At the end of today's conversation, Carrie is going to send around the survey for next week's conversation about housing. And I am really going to need to insist that everyone complete that by the end of this week. I want to make sure that we get through all of these ideas. We are up against a January 25th deadline for a final report. We have a meeting today to talk outdoors. We have a meeting on the 18th to talk about housing. We'll be back together in the new year, January 6th and 7th, to talk about government and the rewrite of CADA. We then have a very short window to add any additional meetings. All of that is a long-winded way of me saying, please, please, when we send these surveys around, complete them, do your reading. If you need something in a different format, Carrie and I are here to work with you in whatever ways we can. We're happy to send it in plain text. I'm happy to get on the phone with you and read every comment and every recommendation to you. What I need is to be able to use these meetings as efficiently as possible to work through these. So with that, our plan today is we're going to work through each of these recommendations one by one. Unfortunately, as I'm doing a count right now, we have 4 members, which does not give us a quorum. We officially have 9 members on this task force. What I'm going to do then is use today's time until or unless we get a 5th member to workshop the ideas or the recommendations where you think we need to go a different direction with them, and we'll make sure that we will get them revised. Our plan overall in each of these meetings on each of the subcommittees, we're going to work through as many ideas as you all can say, this is a hard yes, this is a hard no. We'll get votes on record by roll call vote. On the other ideas where you're saying, I think this is the right concept, but we've got to do some work, Barrick, we're going to spend the time to work through that and to do some revisions. It won't be in real time. So what will happen is we'll take in all of your input, we'll redraft it after today's meeting, and we'll have a separate meeting that will be just voting on those items that we have to revise. With that, I now have Kirsten Beck, I now have Jennifer on. We have a quorum, and that means we are in business. You've received the recommendations. We did receive a little bit last minute, or at the end of last week, some comments back from the Department of Natural Resources for this committee. And one of the things we're going to endeavor to do is continue to get you feedback from each executive agency and from the Office of the Governor as we have this. None of this is intended to tell you what to do. It's intended to provide you additional perspective and additional information. So with that, I'm ready to dive into the recommendations, but I first want to go to our members and ask if you have any questions or any thoughts or reflections you'd like to offer your colleagues before we start digging into this.
Hi, Philip. Can I just introduce myself really quickly?
Absolutely, Hillary. I'm sorry I was going to get to that. Absolutely. Please say hello.
It's really great to see you again, Philip, and see working with you again. Hi, everyone. I am a new face. Obviously, my name is Hillary. I'm one of the co-executive directors at the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition. My co-director, Julie Wiskin, was appointed to this task force. She is on sabbatical now until March. And so I am the new appointment from the Senate for this committee. I am super excited to be working with you all. I've spent some time catching up on everything. So thank you. The only final thing I want to note is that I know I can be hard to understand sometimes, especially if I start speaking too quickly. So please, you will not offend me if you need me to ask, if you need to ask, sorry. If you need me to repeat something, please ask. I will not be offended. And that goes for the interpreters as well. So thank you. Looking forward to finishing this task force out.
Hillary, thank you for introducing yourself. Thank you for diving into this. I know you got up to speed really quickly. a little bit of drinking by fire hose. I know some folks have been helping you get up to speed, and thank you for all the work that you continue to do in Colorado. Lieutenant Governor, before I dive us into recommendation 1, are there any thoughts you'd like to offer the group as we enter what I think is a pretty exciting phase of picking up these ideas and seeing what direction we're going to chart forward for Colorado?
Yeah, well, first of all, Barrick, I'd like to be in Hawaii today, but since I'm not, and I'm not a Marine either, I just want to say good morning to everybody, and I'm excited to join you all for today's meeting of the task force. So it's exciting because we're beginning to finalize our recommendations, which are due, as we know, at the end of the month. So I've personally listened to countless hours of subcommittee discussions over the past year. I wish I could have listened to all of them, but I couldn't. So I know that the recommendations have been extensively discussed to address the real challenges that Coloradans with disabilities are facing. I've heard several people say, well, that's not a problem. You know, the ADA covers that. But if these things weren't problems, we wouldn't have this task force. So I know that we're going to contribute valuable additional feedback over the coming weeks to address some of these things. I know that you challenged people to be bold and make recommendations. When we first started, we didn't account for budget constraints or other practical considerations that could impact implementation. So I think, you know, we need to be bold still, but also practical about the realities and the budget and things like that. But I would really like to make sure that we move the needle a little bit on everything. I remember when I was in the legislature, a lot of people wouldn't vote for task committees and commissions and those kinds of things because they said they form, they meet, and nothing ever happens. So I want to make sure that things happen because this is really an important area. So I know we've had 16 subcommittee members, 9 executive committee members, and we spent dozens of hours on each. I think more than 300 combined hours to discuss the issues and make recommendations because of the challenges that people with disabilities are experiencing. So if there's concerns with subcommittee recommendations, we need to consider alternative solutions to help address the underlying challenges that are identified by the subcommittees and people with lived experience. So when I was in customer service, I think I mentioned this once before, I told my staff, don't tell people that call in what you can't do. So if we were a Medicaid customer service and they called in about Medicare, I would say to them, tell them what you can do. Don't tell them what you can't do. So I'd like to take that spirit into this executive committee and say, maybe we can't do the full recommendation because of budget or whatever, but let's see what we can do. So I look forward to today's discussions and the ones that follow. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I think some great groundwork. And to what the Lieutenant Governor said, I think you all have heard me really push the subcommittee members to be aspirational and to be bold. I've encouraged them consistently that no one was going to raise the bar higher than what they set. And if anything, people were going to try to hang on it and bring it down. That said, we are now at the point they have put forward very intentionally, not just their recommendation, but a clear articulation of what problem it is they're trying to solve and the end state they're trying to create. That's done for you all to be able to, as the executive committee members that have full discretion, to say, we understand the goal and the end state. We think there is either a better path toward that, or as Lieutenant Governor spoke, a practical and pragmatic approach that may take multiple steps, that involves action now, but recognizes whether it's fiscal or other constraints, that says we are going to get to that end state, but it may be 2 years, it may be 5 years, it may be 2 steps along the way. So as we go through each of these, what I will do is read out the problem they're trying to solve and the end state they're intending to create, and then the recommendation. Full and fair disclosure, we have a dozen ideas and now about 75 to 90, excuse me, about 105 minutes. So I'm going to move us through pretty quickly. I will bring up the recommendation. I will ask if folks would like to offer specific comments on what might need to be changed and why. If we feel like we're close to moving it forward, we will go to a roll call. If it's one where we need that additional input and a revision, we'll capture what those revisions are and we'll bring it back at a voting meeting. Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, I just had one more thing to say. You know, I've seen the chart with, you know, what we were proposing for, you know, a solution. I think one of the things, and I can speak for Democrats, Democrats have a hard time doing is trying to put things in really understandable terms. So, when we talk about parking and we talk about, different things like that, I think we need a real simple thing like people come to a ski resort or a hiking trail or whatever, and there's no place for them to unload their equipment. That's the problem. So I think we need to make it really simple so people can understand, well, what do you mean, and why are we doing this? So if we could do that, I think so the general public understands why this is a problem and why we're trying to solve it, I think that would be really important.
Understood. With that, I'm going to dive us in. Our first couple of ideas relate to the subcommittee's conversations around urban and suburban recreation. And they identified a problem that there can be some real variation in the accessibility, specifically of municipal parks and recreation facilities, as well as the frequency of inspections for compliance, which is a theme you're going to hear from all of the subcommittees. They know it's required. They know it's supposed to happen, whether under ADA or CADA, but enforcement is either hit and miss or those inspections are inconsistent. They went on to say that there are also wide ranges in awareness of different types of barriers that may be present. And what they wanted to do was create a world where there's increased accessibility for those with all types of disabilities, whether physical, intellectual, vision, or hearing, for urban and suburban recreation opportunities, through this development of a set of best practices in partnership with those living with a disability. I'm going to read the recommendation. In this case, we have a specific comment back from DNR, so I'll share that. But their recommendation is to instruct an appropriate state agency to convene a working group of municipal park and facility managers, individuals with disabilities, and other subject matters to provide checklists and guides of best practices for ensuring the accessibility of municipal parks, recreation facilities, and playgrounds. As a first step, they put forward, the group should conduct an inventory and gap analysis of existing efforts in both the private and public sectors. The group should be tasked with developing a set of best practices that can be published, referenced, or adopted as municipal code. Included in those practices identified should be a means for ensuring periodic inspections for that ADA CADA compliance and appropriate enforcement mechanisms that shift the burden from the individual seeking access and to the operator of the facility for ensuring compliance. DNR shared back that this would require resources for state agency to implement, and the enforcement authority is unclear as the state does not currently regulate or have authority over municipal facilities like this. That said, on our survey, we had one person say, I think as is or very close. Another said, I support the intent. I think we've got to do some revising. So I'm going to invite members of the task force to offer your thoughts on this recommendation, if it should go forward, and if so, where you think it needs to move in order to do so. Elizabeth, I'm sorry, yes.
That's okay. I'll get us started. So I am in support of this recommendation, and to the Lieutenant Governor's ask that we give it some lived experience, some context. When the ARC of Colorado and in partnership with DLC and CCDC went around the state to do community engagement, one of the repeating themes that we heard was around accessibility and the fact that the burden had shifted to the people who want to use the outdoor area versus the people who created, who maintain, right? So the burden had shifted to the people who would want to use. And when we talk about equity and we talk about creating spaces that are equitably accessible to all Coloradans, I understand that there's likely a fiscal impact, right? With creating the personnel or the training. I just don't see it as long-term. I think as a best practice, this should just be part of their everyday, whatever they're already doing to maintain our outdoor spaces, to make sure that they are equitable and accessible. And so for me, while I see there might be some costs that are associated with getting it started, I think that those will be just sort of establishing some of those best practices and norms and making sure that the training is there. But then if they incorporate that into their already established operations, I don't see that as a long-term thing. I do think that it is reasonable to ask, what is the enforcement? Like, who is the enforcement? Who's doing the oversight? I think that's a reasonable ask and something that's worth discussing.
Understood. Thank you. Hillary.
Yes, so I am also supportive of this recommendation for all of the reasons that Elizabeth mentioned. I do think the concern about authority, like obviously the state does not have control over municipally and county control areas. I wonder if it makes sense to put something in about, there is authority or something like that, just to recognize that, there are some legal limitations on what the state has authority over.
Great point. And if you see me looking away, it's because I'm making notes on one of 4 screens I have in front of me to capture everything that you're saying. Representative Ortiz.
Yeah, I also agree with this recommendation. I think if we're looking to make it organic, this hits to the point, and the mantra that I always say is that basic access is safety. Basic access safety, basic access safety. I'm sure our parks go through a regular review process or audit process on safety, on how often it's being used, on if or when it needs more funding or less funding. There's a normal process by which, at whatever level it belongs to, that it's being reviewed and looked at. As to not be onerous, I think they should build it into that already existing process. They do it for able-bodied folks when it comes to safety. They should be doing it seamlessly for us.
So Representative Ortiz, I'm just making notes. I think on this one, what we'll have to do is bring back a revised version at a second voting meeting. What I'm gathering from everyone, and then I want to check Rep Ortiz with you, we need to acknowledge in this the dynamic of local control in Colorado. We need to emphasize the need for proactive enforcement. And Representative Ortiz, if I'm hearing you, we would revise this or include language to encourage this to be incorporated into standard and existing safety inspections and other ongoing inspections under this belief and commitment that basic access is safety. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to micromanage, but I don't want to give them excuses either. It's like, to whatever extent that they already have an audit or review process, because I know that when it comes to parks and wildlife, like, I know all cities look at what they need to repair, or if they're looking to create a new one, like, there are certain functions that they already do. For as much as possible, we should build in basic access to what they do as far as reviews go.
Understood.
And that's a bigger goal of securing basic access in every arena, is to, whenever they're looking at safety and funding for able-bodied folks, that it's already built in, that they look at it for us as well.
Understood. Thank you. Let me go to Lieutenant Governor and then to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Barrick, and welcome, Rep Ortiz. As we go through these, can we delineate which ones we believe would require legislation and which ones we think we could do without legislation? And then which ones with legislation might need a budget, and could we do general fund, or could we require gifts, grants, and donations to pay for some of this, since we are in a tight budget year?
Lieutenant Governor, let me just check to make sure I'm understanding what it is that you're suggesting. Do you want us, as part of our voting procedure, to identify what the mechanism is to either instigate, implement, or fund this? So whether the agency could do it independently, whether they would need budget, or whether they need legislative, either directive or authority to do so?
I just think we need to figure out what needs legislation, kind of the who, what, when, where, why, and how are we doing this, So we've already talked about an state agency would be the who, and what are they going to do, and why are they going to do it? We've talked about the problem, and how are they going to do it? Are they going to do it with rule? Are they going to do it with legislation? Could it be an executive order? That kind of thing.
Understood. And so we'll work through that. Jennifer, I got your note about the reaction button. Jump into the conversation, and then Elizabeth, I'll come up to you.
Thank you. Hi, Jennifer Harpal. Yeah, I agree with a lot of the comments that have already been made. So I would want to understand, do we have the authority to do this, right? It sounds like we could only make a recommendation to municipalities, if that's correct. This doesn't apply to federal or state public spaces, right? This is just about municipalities. So that I have questions about that. And also I think it would be helpful to know, like, do we have any idea how many facilities we're talking about here, right? I mean, presumably it's like hundreds, thousands. So those are questions that I have about the feasibility of this proposal. I do like the idea of building it into existing safety, mechanisms that we already have. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Thank you, Jennifer. Elizabeth, I'm going to go to you in just one second. I want to respond to Jennifer and just to give everyone listening a sense of where this recommendation came from. This started probably 3 months ago, initially with an idea shared out of requiring municipal parks to do A, B, and C. As questions were raised about local control and what authority the state had to require these things to happen, that is how it evolved into the recommendation you see before you of the idea that the state would convene this working group of those park and facility managers, along with those with lived experience, to develop a set of best practices that could be adopted as municipal code. But there was no intention in this recommendation that we usurp that local control, simply that you put in place a set of best practices and guides that could be. That said, where I think there is a requested ask for a state role is in elevating the enforcement and the compliance from a responsive to complaints to requiring a proactive means of these inspections, which could be an entirely new inspection scheme, or it could be, as Rep. Ortiz has suggested, something like requiring these to be built into existing inspections. But Jeff, I think you raise valid questions about the cost, the feasibility, and the authority, which is why we're having this conversation now. Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Moran. Barrick, mine's more of a question. So can you just help me understand when they were putting together their recommendations? So one being, I'm looking at recommendation 1, establishing best practices. But then when I look at recommendations 3 through, I want to say 7, those are very specific, right? And so I just wanted to better understand how come 3 through 7 didn't fall under that umbrella of recommendation 1, why they were set as standalone instead of putting them under recommendation 1 of, something like, best practices to include but not limited to these following.
I think it's a very fair question. Part of it, frankly, is just the flow of conversations that the subcommittee took. They separated their work out into discussing outdoor recreation in general, things like trails and rivers and waterways. They had a set of conversations around ski areas, and they had a set of conversations that were very specific to urban and suburban recreation facilities. So these two that you're seeing as 1 and 2 were the ones that came up from those more focused conversations on urban and suburban, while the other ideas around accessibility and parking were looking more broadly statewide. That doesn't mean they're perfect, and that doesn't mean you all don't have full room to do your own distilling down. And I will readily say what you see in a lot of these is the combination of ideas already. But if you've got ideas to better chunk them together, this group has full authority to do so. Go ahead, please.
Just a follow-up question then. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I'm wondering as we present these, because when I think of urban and suburban recreation areas, right, and I think of our outdoor parks and recreation areas, I clearly see the distinction between sort of what I see as sort of public outdoor recreation areas, whether or not they are urban or suburban. At least for me, doesn't matter. Like, to me, in my head, the way I'm organizing them is an outdoor recreation area includes urban and suburban. It's inclusive, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I do see a difference then between when I think about ski resorts or businesses, places where we are wanting the outdoor recreation to be much more accessible and equitable, but our places that are not necessarily run or monitored or by a state agency, but rather by a private corporation.
It's
And so,
oh, go ahead.
so anyway, I guess there's a part of me that, and I see Rep. Ortiz has his hand up, and I know this is something you feel very passionate about. So I'd love to hear from you, Rep. Ortiz, about whether or, how you organize them in your head and whether or not that outdoor recreation would include urban and suburban, and then to Lieutenant Governor's note, also rural areas.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring Rep. Ortiz in next. I do just want to offer for understanding of the process. You will see a number where the subcommittee specifically mentions staffed recreation facilities, and they're differentiating those from those that are simply managed by whether it's DNR or local parks. So they attempted to do that. I will also tell you, so everyone knows, there were a whole lot of ideas that started off. We had this discussion on parking at ski resorts, and then we had a conversation about parking at trailheads. And that's when some of those got consolidated and pulled up into these outdoor general. But Rep. Ortiz, you had your hand up, and I know Elizabeth's interested in your thoughts on those groupings and the distinction, if any, between urban, suburban, rural, general rec, and staffed or managed facilities versus just open recreation.
Yeah, I think Barrett did a good job. So I don't want to repeat anything that he just said, but he did a good job in kind of giving a flavor of how the conversations evolved. So like if we started at parking in trailhead, talking about parking in trailheads and about dropping off equipment in trailheads, then we started talking about ski areas individually. They eventually morphed to, this is a common thing throughout. So let's create a recommendation that talks about parking, especially if there's adaptive sports equipment throughout, and talk about the universal goals around solving those universal problems throughout. Yeah, ski industry is private, but guess what, baby? They're on federal lands, and we have the federal ADA, and that comes with its own set of obligations and requirements that, in my opinion, they're currently not meeting. So, and I know there's some people out there that are like, well, skiing's not really accessible for able-bodied folks, let alone disabled folks. You haven't spent a day out there working with adaptive sports program. Downhill skiing is the most accessible sport there is. Why? Because gravity does all the work. You just have to be able to do your turns, right? I've seen quads go down and rip it down mountains. You know what I mean? So like what you're seeing here is a representation of how the amazing work that the subcommittee did in trying to consolidate where it made sense, like parking, for example, and a place to safely drop off and or set up equipment. If it's industry-based or topic-based, it's because there were a certain set of issues that came up that were specific to that industry or to that outdoor environment. So I don't know if that gives further context to what Barrick was saying, but in talking about urban and suburban parks at the very beginning, I felt like the subcommittee felt like that was an area that wasn't being discussed. So it had its own topic of discussion. And even though, yes, that there are some functions of local controls and municipality, I can't help but go back to Chris Hines' statement during the government access, statement, is that local control does not trump basic access. It does not trump the ADA, right? Like we want to give them wiggle room on how they want to implement and how they solve these problems, right? By, for example, implementing it through an already existing audit or inspection process, right? Not trying to be overly burdensome. But if the function is not, if the problem is still not being solved, they still have a responsibility to do it, right? So, but this is how their conversations happen and how they consolidate their ideas and thoughts. I don't know if that gives clarity or if it just makes it more convoluted for you, Elizabeth.
Can I follow up really quick, Barrick? Thank you for that, Rep. Ortiz. I think where I'm wondering is whether or not what has been organized as urban and suburban recreation, and then what has been labeled as sorry, as I scroll through outdoor recreation. Do we need those delineations, or can some of those things fit under sort of a broader umbrella?
I think that's definitely an option that we could include those. What I'm going to propose, and it's only because I'm looking, we're at 11:35. We are on recommendation 1 of 12. What I'm going to propose, this probably, to my benefit, will highlight the need for you all to complete that survey for me ahead of each meeting. I think for outdoor rec, we're going to hit a little bit of a do-over on that. Carrie, I'm going to ask you to make sure that survey stays open. I'm going to ask members, we will go through and clear out anything we actually get through today. But we're probably going to have to take another swing at this one. What I'd like to do is take everyone's input, see where we can revise idea recommendation number 1. Let's go through the rest of the conversation today and see if we don't, as Elizabeth is suggesting, end up incorporating it in other places. I'm sensing general support for this, but I need to do some rethinking of the mechanism of change and where this fits in. So unless there is objection, I'm going to move us to the next recommendation with my promise to come back to this as today's time or our next time allows. Perfect. I'm going to go to number 2. And this one may or may not be fitting neatly into this urban and suburban. The conversation did come up specifically related to the resources within professionally managed urban and suburban parks and facilities. What they noted here, and the problem you'll see, is that while there's been an increase in the efforts to ensure the accessibility of municipal rec facilities, there's more work to be done on this front, and a need for greater attention to the accessibility needs, particularly this group named of the blind or visually impaired, the hearing impaired, and neurodivergent. What they want to see is a world where all of these parks, and there's increased access, specifically they talk to urban and suburban recreation facilities for Coloradans with a disability. Understanding local control and limits on resources, what they proposed is that we create incentives for state, county, or city parks to expand access for those with disabilities, including without limitation, the blind or visually impaired, the hearing impaired, and neurodivergent, in areas that again include but aren't limited to green spaces, parks, and other similar facilities. Specifically, they named within incorporated areas through multiple solutions, such as wayfinding, braille signage, technology-assisted navigation, or other means. So distilling this down, as the Lieutenant Governor said at the top, we've got areas in our urban and suburban areas that just aren't quite accessible, particularly for people with different types of disabilities. And this group wants to see the creation of some incentives that specifically are used for those types of modifications or enhancements. Again, we had a couple of surveys. One was, I like this idea. The other was, I like it too, but we've got to do a little work on it. So I would love your thoughts on this. Is this one we can keep as this group focused on urban and suburban? What ideas does anybody have to layer into here, or where it needs to go to be something you would be enthusiastic to support? Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Michael Stone speaking. A question, because obviously speaking specifically in the blind community, is there any way to combine this with the first one, with our previous conversation? Does anybody see how that can be done?
So, Michael, I will just offer from a facilitator standpoint, doing so would be consistent with the conversations that the subcommittee had. Both of these were supported unanimously by all the members in attendance. And if what we are talking about is a group that's going to convene thought leaders, people with lived experience, to develop some best practices, I don't think it would be inconsistent with what the group talked about for that same group to develop a strategy and a structure for these incentives. I think the group was intentional in saying they want both things to happen. They wanted to see incentives created, and they want to see this modified set of best practices and proactive enforcement and compliance. Rep. Ortiz, your hand is up.
Yeah, I see them as two separate things. I got to be honest, because one is talking about building into their own inspection and accountability. Another one is specifically citing in a very generic way too, incentives. Well, what does that mean? Are we talking about further tax breaks? Are we talking about increased state funding, which good luck on getting, right? Like, what does that mean? That is such a generic term. So I'm not comfortable lumping the two together, because I think they look at solving the problem in two specific and different ways.
Understood. Thank you. Jennifer?
Thank you, Jennifer Harpel. Yeah, that is my exact question. What does create incentives mean, right? Who do we want to create the incentives? How are they going to create incentives? What do we mean by incentives, right? The goal makes sense, but I don't understand how this proposal will get us there.
So what I'm going to do, and I'll bring in Rep. Ortiz, I'm going to not let you get away quite so easily with just saying what the challenge is here, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm going to push you and every member to say what this should be is the state appropriate $87 million a year, or the state provide 200 million in tax cuts. And the Gov's policy team and budget folks will start kicking me when they see me next. But what I want to hear from all of you, to Lieutenant Governor's point, don't tell me what the challenge is. Tell me what we can do. And Jennifer, I'm not disagreeing that this is ambiguous. So let's figure out what it should be. Let's go to Rep. Ortiz and then Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, just to give further context, I know I expressed concern during the subcommittee about this, but like, again, our job, it's not ours as executive committee members to dictate to the subcommittees how they should word things or do things. It's ours to give our perspective, and then they do with it what they will. But I do remember specifically on the genericness of incentive, and also called out, look, like this is not a cash grab for departments. That's not what this is going to be, because guess what? We don't got it like that. Not with Tabor in effect. Like, we just don't. You know, and if we're talking about basic access, this is something that municipalities, counties, whatever level this is, should be doing anyway. So just want to give further context there. I'll leave it at that. We got a lot to talk about.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor, and then Hillary.
Well, I think everybody's familiar with the Colorado Disability Funding Committee that was put in our office a few years ago. And I think, you know, we have quite a budget right now. We don't. The Disability Funding Committee has quite a budget right now to grant out to different organizations to do creative things for people with disabilities. So I think, you know, that could be a funding option to give some incentives on their grant rounds to organizations or recreation facilities or whatever that want to improve this. Of course, it's up to the appointed members of the committee to appropriate the funds, but I just know there are funds available for that. So I think we shouldn't worry about the funding at this point in time and just, you know, maybe see that as a potential option in the future.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Hillary.
Yes, Hillary speaking. So I think, you know, I think tax and rebates, refunds, etc., are not effective for things like this. I think in order for this recommendation to be effective, it has to be some kind of grant program, whether that is grant-like program, you know, whether it's the Disability Funding Committee or another, you know, source of money. Yeah, I think just to be effective, it's got to be entities being able to get money up front to make the improvements they need.
Understood. Here's what I'm going to propose to the group. Again, because we're at 11:45, we've worked our way through two ideas. I hope this is highlighting for you what we can do in advance so that you think of today's conversation when you go back and do me that favor of doing the outdoor rec survey. Or if you did it once and now you're having this conversation and saying, wow, I realize additional comments will be really helpful. I'm going to ask you to do that. I'm going to ask you to think through the lens of today's conversation as you redo the recreation, and also as you think about housing. On these two ideas, I'm hearing pretty clearly we need to go back to the drawing board and bring some ideas and rethink. I'm going to ask all of you to weigh in on that survey of, should this idea number 2 of create incentives, should it move forward? Do you have specific actionable ways for that to move forward? Or is this so broad that you don't want to move it forward and you want to focus on other levers? And please don't mistake any of my word choice for me having an opinion on that, other than I need all of you to have opinions on it. But before I move it on, let me go to Rep. Ortiz and then to Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think what's also might be a good idea for y'all is, you know, for all of us, is to do our homework in advance. And if you have questions or something's not clear, Barrick and Carrie were a part of every single subcommittee meeting. They were amazing at it. So if you do have clarifying questions, for the sake of saving the executive committee time, it might be worthwhile to speak directly to them to get that context. That way you come to the meeting here with that and ready to go.
Appreciate that. And please know we are available. Call us, text us, email us. We're happy to jump on the phone or email any background on it. Elizabeth.
I just wanted to voice that I am in favor of moving forward with recommendation 2. I certainly appreciate the intersection between enforcement versus incentives, but I think those go hand in hand. So I'm in favor and in support of this one.
Let me just do what I'm going to call a temperature check or a straw poll. This isn't a binding vote. We're not looking at any language, but the general idea of some incentives that we all need to have agreed need to be very clearly defined. Is that something that you do want to find language that you would move forward?
Yeah, I'm good with wanting to move that forward, just in the general terms for now.
Yes.
So I'm not going to ask a roll call vote because I don't have language to put in front, but I'm seeing pretty overwhelming consensus that we want to find language that's specific enough to be actionable. Now I'm going to call an audible executive decision. I'm going to shift gears because we've got at least one member, and I think a few from our recreation committee that want to weigh in on some of these. I'm going to leapfrog us forward to the ski stuff. These are some places where, frankly, we had some tense conversations. There are some contentious issues. There's some things for you all to work through. I'm confident you can and you will. As I go into these, I don't want to lose sight of the outdoor general. Ski industry, for example, was one where we had a lot of conversations about parking, about the ability to offload equipment and particularly adaptive equipment. That is now incorporated in outdoor general, not to be lost here. But I want to make sure that we've got time while we've got some of our subcommittee members who have thoughts to dig into some of these. A bit of background. There's some things happening in the ski industry that really came to the forefront. Some of that is around adaptive equipment and how easy or difficult it is for an adaptive athlete or anyone with a disability using different forms of adaptive equipment to access outdoor recreation. In this case, we're talking specifically about ski resorts. You'll hear me throw out things like ANSI B77 and ropeways. What these are, ropeways is a fancy way of me saying chairlifts, gondolas, and other ways to get up the mountain. The ANSI B77 committee is a committee of the national body that develops codes that specifically looks at these chairlifts or ropeways. They have one that's looking at recommendations for that. There have been questions raised about whether there is adequate voice for those with a disability or those using adaptive equipment. Full transparency. I've spoken with people on both sides of that perspective. I spoke with members of the B77 committee who said, we absolutely have those voices. We listen to those voices. They're welcome at the table. I spoke with a member of the disability community who said, I keep trying to tell them and I keep getting overruled or ignored. My voice is not appropriately heard. So a lot of the conversations we ended up having were about the representation on the B77 committee and whether the views of those with a disability are adequately considered in the work of that committee, but really in the end product of it, of how accessible and compatible these different ski lifts are. So that's the background of what you're seeing here, and a lot of conversation of how can we get to where there are more voices and more accessibility for those with a disability. We had some earlier recommendations that were more prescriptive. Things like require this type of representation, leverage the role of Colorado as the 800-pound gorilla in the ski industry. The group heard from different stakeholders through that public sharing and in their own discussions, came up with the ideas there. That's a lot of background, but I think it's important for everybody to understand what happened going into this. So the first idea, this is recommendation 8 for anybody following along when we're looking specifically at ski resorts. And this speaks to the B77 committee. The problem they identified was that there are limited individuals with lived experience with a disability on this B77 committee that sets the standards for these passenger ropeways. And that while passenger participation is open, but it requires an investment of time. It requires financial costs. So individuals with a disability who already have overall higher rates of poverty, lesser income, and higher expenses, there can be barriers to them participating. And what the group really wants to see is more voices by those with a disability on the committee. So what they're recommending, and Rep. Ortiz, I see your hand up, I'm going to bring you in first. They recommended that we establish a mechanism to enable the state on behalf of individuals with a disability or excuse me, on behalf of individuals, manufacturers of adaptive equipment and operators to provide direct input to the committee about the needs and experiences of Colorado individuals, nonprofits, and businesses relating to the committee's work, leverage our standing in the ski and outdoor industry to support active outreach to recruit input from adaptive athletes and individuals with a disability. And the group was very specific and intentional in saying, as part of this effort, explore whether the state or the state in partnership with industry can provide financial support for individuals with a disability to participate in the committee's work. Rep Ortiz, I'll let you go first, and we'll open it up to the group for questions or thoughts on this idea to find ways to expand the membership of the B77.
Yeah. So I express a little hesitation on this when it comes to state funding a national body, especially if we're not going to be able to have any say on more accessible voices, voting accessible members being on the B77 ANSI. As far as I know, there's only one voting member that lives with a physical disability that requires adaptive sports equipment to participate. And when Barrick was giving context, he was the one that feels like he is ignored and not listened to. Just want to give that context and be very clear. So, I am okay with this, but there would have to be some strings attached. There would have to be some meaningful, I don't know what the legalese is there around mandating a national body, creating mandates from a state based on whether they go for our grant funding or not. I know there's people that do that all the time. Maybe we're able to do that. Great. But I'm not willing to fund the B77's work without any assurances that it's going to be more equitable and more fair and representative of people living with a disability, because that is part of the problem. So,
and Rep Ortiz, if I can keep you for just a minute, and then Hillary, I'll come to you next. As written, the intent anyway is that any funds would be specifically to support an individual with a disability participating on the B77 committee.
Right. For me, is that a voting member? Are they just being a consultant? Like we maybe specifying, and then maybe we don't try not to micromanage, but we specify in the recommendation that we expect some of the funding to go towards those that they might be contracting, because another thing that happens is they want to use us for our lived experience for free. When I say they, companies that can make money, like apps that want to create, a systematic standard for whether trails are accessible or not, right? They want to use our free labor. So are some of these grants going to go for the consultants? Is some of this funding going to go to people to sit and be able to participate and vote on B77? So don't want to micromanage too much, but we have to differentiate and say, yeah, we want funding for both because we expect both to happen.
Understood. Thank you. And this is a great example where I'm going to ask folks, not just on this, but on all of the ideas when you do the survey, to provide exactly this kind of input that, I could support this if it's got these strings, if it's got these guardrails around it, and we have to make clear that this is what we're doing with it. Hillary, your thoughts?
So I have a comment and then a question. So my comment first is I actually have a fair amount of that's everybody consternation maybe with this recommendation, not because I don't think that we need more disabled voices at the table and who are voting members, but because I am not necessarily convinced that this is the role that the state should be playing. I think, I don't know, it's, I totally understand we have a lot of power as the state of Colorado because we do have, a large, robust ski industry. If there are limited amount of things that the state can do, I just keep coming back to the question of whether or not this is the most appropriate role for the state to be playing. Should the state play it? Yes. We could, but is it the most appropriate? And should there maybe be some you mentioned a label here between the state and, like nonprofits and things like that. So my question, I understand the recommendations that we are putting together for the state legislature. Has there been any discussion or thought around, we had the recommendations for the state legislature, and then there's maybe like a separate list of things that we think, hey, these are good ideas, but maybe not the most appropriate way for the state to play. I don't know. I'm really torn about this recommendation for other the reasons that I just said.
No, I appreciate it. And for clarity, there hasn't yet been those conversations. I think this group here is exactly situated to have those. And I think part of this comes back to identifying the end state we're trying to create. Is this the best tool to get us there, the best tactic? How do we get there? Is there a multi-step? Does what these 55 recommendations embody end up being the 5-year plan for the future of disability rights in Colorado? And we've got to move the needle meaningfully, but one step at a time. So Hillary, I think there's a lot of room for this group to identify exactly the path you're talking about. Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Barrick. Well, I have to admit, I'm really ignorant about ANSI B77 committee. I am knowledgeable about how committees are appointed in our state. We specify we need 3 lawyers, we need 3 dentists, we need 3, whatever, and they have to come from this part of the state or that or this, How are these committee members appointed and who appoints them? And would it be just worth our while to, if we can't do anything else, send a letter with our concerns and ask them to consider appointing people with disabilities on this committee that have power and voting and all that kind of stuff. So maybe, I don't know who knows about ANSI, but maybe you can educate me.
Yeah, and Lieutenant Governor, I'm glad we've got some subcommittee members on. I may ask Rep. Ortiz, I may ask Melanie Mills from the subcommittee to weigh in. I will tell you, I had conversations as Rep. Ortiz was direct about it, and I'm not trying to hide any of who I spoke with. I spoke with members of the committee who say that they're doing great. I spoke with the individual that the Rep. Ortiz, highlighted, who is the one member with a disability, who says his voice isn't being heard. What I was told by the committee is they have an open door. They would welcome more members there. I also heard that those members with a disability do not feel that their voice is being valued or considered. And I heard that they would like to see more voices of those with a disability on there, but there is a challenge in them being able to make the commitment to do so, which is why this recommendation got there. But I don't know, Melanie or Rep. Ortiz, if you have anything to clarify on the technical aspects of how ANSI's committee is formed.
Eric,
Melanie, see you on camera, jump in, please.
I'm happy to speak to it, but I would defer if Rep. Ortiz, as a member of the executive committee, wants to jump in. I'm not on the executive committee, so I don't want to be the first one to speak on this.
Melanie, you go ahead. You go ahead.
The ANSI B77 committee is a national standard setting committee that establishes national standards for a whole variety of things, from motorcycle helmets to ski lifts and everything in between. And the B77 committee in particular focuses on ski lifts, and it is made up of a wide variety of folks who are interested in ski lifts. That includes manufacturers of ski lifts. That includes folks who direct and operate adaptive sports programs. That includes representatives from ski resorts. It is a national standard setting body, and the standards it establishes for ski lifts are required by our Forest Service permits as ski areas to comply with. They're also required by state law to comply with the NCB 77 committee. So it is a place I think it's important for people with lived experience to be, and more people with lived experience to be. I think the complexifier that Barrick refers to is it's a largish committee. There are lots of interested folks at the table, and I wouldn't wish attending these meetings on anyone who isn't intensely interested. They are long, technical meetings where there's lots of engineering conversation. Safety is obviously a huge component of that conversation. But I agree with Rep. Ortiz that there is a need for more voices from people with lived experience on the committee. And I think the barrier is the resources to get there and participate. My understanding is that the NCB 77 committee is eager to have a more diverse set of voices on these issues at the table. But they've got to be folks who can attend. I believe it's 2 meetings a year. These are live meetings. That's kind of where the committee was focused, was on trying to identify ways to get people there. And I just throw out, maybe the Lieutenant Governor knows whether the Colorado Disability Funding Committee might be a resource, because you're talking about about 2 days of meetings 2 times a year, and the resources for essentially travel and lodging to send people to attend these meetings. So that would be my my input on the meetings, or on the NCB 77 committee.
Thank you, Melanie. I appreciate you providing that background context. And I know the LG had asked, how prescriptive the membership is. I think you spoke to some of that, and whether they pay per diem or any compensation. My understanding is no, which is why we're having this conversation. And I think what I'm hearing from the group is folks do want to have more voices on that committee. The question is, what do we tie to that, as Rep. Ortiz raised? How do we ensure that their voice will be a voting voice, and that it will be welcomed there? Let me do a temperature check. Do members feel that the state taking a proactive role, whether looking at our disability fund or looking to partner with industry to provide this kind of financial support for individuals to participate with some strings attached, is a direction we should go? Before I ask that, though, I see Rep. Ortiz's hand up.
No, I want to answer that question, if you don't mind. Like, I want to jump right into, like, let's do our work. We have work to do. And I think Melanie did. That's why I wanted her to speak first. Did a great job of, at least in my opinion, illuminating to all that there is overlap between the state of Colorado and this national organization. I was just about to say they work closely with DORA. Like, they're woven into the state fabric in a lot of different ways. And so I do think because of that, it's appropriate for the state to have a role, or at least influence, in ensuring that we get those voices there. Honestly, like, I feel like this could also fall into the role of maybe sponsorships. Let's talk private sponsorships by, adaptive athletes to be able to sit and be on this committee, right? Like, this is something that nonprofits, like, and I don't want to speak for them, but for example, I don't know, CCDC and others like NSCD, to be able to also sponsor per diem, or to make this a grant application for people to apply to do this in the name of community and in their name, right? Like, there's a lot of different opportunities to do this, not just the state, and that's something else CDU should be doing, Lieutenant Governor, right? So, but I'm also very wary of over promising and over committing the disability rights funding, right? Like, I don't want that to be the go-to pot of money that we go to when it comes to securing basic access, because the bottom line is a lot of people should be, and departments and should be doing this anyways. That can't be like, oh, well, we need money, we're just going to raid those coffers constantly until there's nothing left, right? So should the state have a role? I believe they should. Should we have a role in possibly getting more voices on there? I believe we should. I support this recommendation. I'm going to vote in support of it.
So let me thank you, Rep. Ortiz. And with that, I want to get real clear on what this recommendation does and does not say and see if we want to go to a vote on it. This recommendation as written does not say who specifically should be placed on it, and it doesn't say which office of state government. It says establish a mechanism to enable the state on behalf of these different individuals, manufacturers, operators of programs to provide that input and to explore whether the state or the state in partnership, and it currently says with industry. I think it's entirely possible for us to say in partnership with industry, nonprofits, and other organizations can provide the support for individuals to participate. With that, quick show of hands, should we take this one to a vote? I'm seeing thumbs up, so unless I hear objection, I'm going to go to a roll call vote on this as written with the sole modification of the state in partnership with rather than industry, the state in partnership with industry, nonprofits, and other organizations can provide that support. So with that, I will go to a roll call. As a reminder, the Lieutenant Governor does not vote unless there is a tie as chair. But Mr. Ortiz, I will go first to you with the vote.
Yes.
Ms. Moran,
Yes.
Ms. Jorgensen,
Yes, with the additions.
Jennifer,
Yes.
thank you. Kirsten, I think Kirsten may have had to drop off. Mr. Stone,
Michael Stone, yes.
by a unanimous vote of 5 present, the chair not needing to vote, recommendation 8 will move forward with the sole modification to expand who would provide the support to include the state in partnership with industry, nonprofits, and other organizations. With that, we're going to continue on our B77 and ski industry conversation. Elizabeth. You muted still, Elizabeth.
I just wanted to let you know I am here. I'm going off camera. I'm having some intermittent Wi-Fi access challenges.
And thank you very much for the heads up. The next recommendation, headline is ensure appropriate equipment information is provided to that equipment. And the problem identified is that there is variation and there are continued developments and evolutions in adaptive equipment and limitations on how much information is provided to the B77 committee about this equipment. For those that aren't way in the weeds on this, what this comes to is there is different type of equipment and different elements that affect how compatible different ropeways or chairlifts are with this equipment. The goal that this group wants to accomplish is to maximize the information and how current that information is about adaptive equipment that is known and is being considered by the B77 committee. So their recommendation to you, that was a 7-0 vote, is to require that commercial manufacturers of adaptive equipment or the components for the equipment who do business in Colorado provide information to that ANSI B77 committee as requested about their equipment, the technical specifications, and any necessary information reasonably necessary to maximize the compatibility of passenger ropeways, again, fancy way for saying chairlifts, with that adaptive equipment. Any questions or general comments on this idea? Is there anybody who objects to this idea?
Mr. Rep. Ortiz-Barrick, if I may, and I think I brought this up last time during the subcommittee meeting, is like, as much as you can require a business to give, right? Like we have to define that a little bit better. I think we need to define as like outside of proprietary information, something they think is the secret sauce of their equipment, but like we're talking about dimensions that, and that way the ski lift engineers can manufacture to an understanding of basic dimensions, you know, that kind of thing. So just want to be clear, because I know that was the question that I had or concern I had during the subcommittee meeting, but I support this. The point is to try and create a pipeline of information that gets from those that make adaptive sports equipment to those that work directly with ski lift companies and trying to make sure they're securing our basic access and safety. So I'll leave it at that.
Understood. Thank you, Representative. I'm just making a note to myself that we would add a carve out for trade secret or proprietary information in what's being reasonably requested. This one may be straightforward. I'll see where we are. I'm going to go ahead and go to a roll call vote. David Ortiz,
Yes.
Elizabeth Moran,
Yes.
Hillary Jorgensen,
Yes.
Jennifer Harpole,
Yes.
Kirsten's not with us, Michael Stone.
Michael Stone, yes.
Thank you all. By unanimous vote of those present, with the Lieutenant Governor not needing to vote, this idea will move forward with the added carve-out that we are not expecting manufacturers of components or equipment to provide proprietary or trade secret information. This next item is one that I want to allow adequate conversation on. This again relates to what happens when these new ropeways are being manufactured and a Colorado business is contracting to have one of them. The problem identified is that some believe manufacturers of these reportees. I'm sorry, did you want to jump in?
No, I want to wait till you're done talking. I just want to make sure I get in the queue. Please continue, Barrick. Sorry.
You're in. All good. Some believe these manufacturers do not give adequate consideration to the requirements of ADA and CADA relating to the design of the equipment and specifically to the needs of individuals with a disability. The goal and the intended end state is that ADA and CADA requirements and the needs of Coloradans with a disability are appropriately, and this word was intentional by this group, equally considered with other factors by manufacturers of passenger ropeways contracting with facilities in Colorado. So their recommendation is that at the time of contracting with any operator of a public or commercial recreational facility in Colorado, require that the manufacturer of that passenger ropeway acknowledge receipt of or full awareness of ADA, CADA, and the applicable requirements as they relate to the subject matter of the contract. I'm going to let Rep. Ortiz speak first. I'm hoping everyone read the recommendations because this is the one out of your 55 items where you had a member offer their dissenting opinion. So I'm going to have Rep. Ortiz go, and then Melanie, I'm going to invite you to offer comments if you'd like, or you're free to let your written comments stand. But Rep. Ortiz, you're first.
Thank you. So just to give context to this, what is happening around ski resorts, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but the industry is asking for higher capacity. The industry is asking for safer lift for kids, for example, which is great. Like the industry is asking for all of these things, and that's where we're getting the new generation of lifts from. The one thing that they're not impressing upon the manufacturers is basic access of skiers with disabilities. And I know that because the new lifts are not accessible with currently existing equipment. They are not. They're not being considered. They're not being designed with us in mind. And so the intent of this recommendation, and y'all have seen me do this in the legislature on plenty of other bills, is creating a mandate that any contract signed with any ski lift also states that the manufacturer understands that the Americans with Disability Acts exist in this country that they're selling to. They're selling in Colorado, for example, that they understand that CADA exists and that they will consider equally among many other safety concerns the basic access of adaptive skiers. I'm not trying to we're not trying to micromanage how or what they do that. We're just trying to create a paper trail of recognizing that this must be considered, because currently, I guarantee you, it is not. And safety for kids is not mutually exclusive to safety for adaptive skiers. And I have yet to be given an example of how creating greater access for people with disabilities creates less safety for able-bodied folks. Let's look, and in fact, the opposite tends to happen. Let's look at automatic doors for people that are moving product when it comes to retail stores. Let's talk about curb cuts when it comes to mom and dads with strollers, right? Let's talk about ramps when it comes to mom and dads and strollers. Basic access always has improved safety of able-bodied folks as well. So, this is definitely one that I support, and I think that we need to support. And unless I hear a specific example otherwise, this has been a fight or a disagreement or a challenge that has been ongoing for years. And we need to change what is currently happening, because what is currently happening does not consider us. Otherwise, they would already be designing to us, and they're not. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Rep. Ortiz. Elizabeth, before I come to you, because Melanie was the one who submitted a dissenting opinion, I want to give her the opportunity to share her thoughts if she'd like to.
Sure, thank you, Barrick and members of the executive committee. I'm for the most part going to let the dissent speak for itself. I appreciate that Rep. Ortiz is passionate about this topic. His perspective is respected, but it is not the experience of the ski resort operators, that they're not considering the ADA and CADA requirements. And I would say significant interest here, and we touched on it in your discussion of the previous recommendation. These contracts to purchase ski lifts in a highly competitive ski industry are filled with proprietary information. And there is a strong objection to anything that would provide an opportunity for the public or agencies to have access to those contracts. I would suggest to you that if there is an alternative mechanism for ski areas or manufacturers to attest to their consideration of compliance with ADA and CADA, that is not a problem, because they're already doing that. And I would urge the executive committee to consider another mechanism other than opening up these private contracts that are filled with proprietary information.
Thank you, Melanie. Let me go to the exec committee, and I'll go first to Elizabeth and then to Hillary.
Actually, Barrick, I'm going to yield to the Lieutenant Governor.
Oh, thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
Sorry, I was off camera. I had to warm up some lunch. I'm in back-to-back all day. So I really appreciate, I've spoken with Vail Resorts about this one, and I appreciate Melanie's. I don't think we're asking that we open up the whole contract, but I think the intent is to get in on the front end to avoid lawsuits later, sort of as a preventive kind of a thing. After lifts are installed, yep, there's no, I mean, we just need to get in on the front end of this. So if that doesn't get there, you know, maybe we can think of another way, but I think that was our intent, make sure we don't get lawsuits.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Michael, I think I see your hand up. I'm going to go to Hillary, and then you, and then Rep. Ortiz. And then Elizabeth, if you wanted to jump back in, I'm sorry, I'll bring you in as well. So we'll go Hillary, Michael, Rep. Ortiz, and Elizabeth in that order.
Thank you, Barrick. Hillary speaking. So I am very supportive of this recommendation. And I understand the objection. However, first of all, you're just putting existing law into the contract. So you're not putting anything new into the contract. Secondly, I don't think that just putting a reference to the ADA and HADA into the contract immediately makes it open to the public. If something gets to the point where it's being litigated in court, the contracts can be part of discovery, and the proprietary portions of that contract can be redacted. And so, yeah, I'm really supportive of this recommendation, and I think it makes sense. Like, it's already existing law, it already has to be followed. I don't think putting it in the contract hurts, and to the extent that there is proprietary information, you know, in the contracts, in the case of litigation, you just redact whatever is proprietary in the discovery process.
Thank you, Hillary. Appreciate the perspective. Let me go to Michael Stone, then Rep. Ortiz, and then Ms. Moran.
Thank you, Barrick. Michael Stone speaking. In going with the theme that Lieutenant Governor said from the beginning, about practicality, this one seems very straightforward and practical. The statement was made that the new equipment that coming in is not accessible. So we're already at a loss if that is in fact the case. And I love the idea of trying to avoid breach of contract lawsuits in the future. So having this language in here up front seems to be extremely practical. And as far as I can tell, there's no direct cost associated, unless somebody can correct me with that.
Thank you, Michael. Rep Ortiz and then Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think Hillary said it well. I don't want to, harp on her points too much, but it's not my intent to have access to the proprietary information. Now, if the concern is, and I can only speculate because I haven't seen these contracts, but if the concern is some of that proprietary information is in direct contrast with existing accessible law, well, then that's a problem, right? Maybe that's why you're nervous. I don't know. Again, I'm not asking for access to that proprietary information, that contract. What I am asking is that manufacturers that are delivering products to the United States, as they're expected to do, whether they're toys, instant noodles, whatever, that they follow the law in the United States. And in the United States, specifically in Colorado, we have federal ADA and we have CADA. Being upfront and citing those does not open up the rest of the contract, nor should it, if it makes you more comfortable to say, hey, in doing this, we're not asking for proprietary information in the contract to be divulged unless it is in direct contrast to the intent of the law, the federal ADA and CADA. Great, well, then we can do that. If that gives more of the warm and fuzzies, we can do that. But, I completely agree that this is simple, this is straightforward, and this only requires us, and is creating a paper trail that we will be considered on our safety, and our access is considered on equal footing as everyone else's.
Forgive me, I'm just making some notes on some ways we may want to modify this. Let me go to Elizabeth and then Jennifer.
I agree with what has already been expressed by the Lieutenant Governor and Hillary and Mr. Stone and Representative Ortiz. I just want to add this little bit. At least what we're hearing is that the ADA is not being necessarily acknowledged in new and incoming. I don't think there's ever a time when we should not be raising up the rights, even if it's federal law and it's everybody knows it. I would argue everybody doesn't know it. It's been since 1990, and I know that my organization specifically, and my personal experience, particularly around people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, with traumatic brain injuries, who are aging and have cognitive disabilities. There are parts of the ADA that I think that some folks don't know about that have to do with not just safety and accessibility, but also language access and effective communication, and things that, to Representative Ortiz's point, benefit everyone. And if there is an opportunity, especially if there is a no cost, simple adding some language into things, way to raise awareness and bring back to the forefront things that make it across the board for all kinds of disabilities, but for the public in general, to make spaces and activities more accessible, I'm having a hard time seeing the downside.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm going to go to Jennifer for final comments, and then I'm going to propose language responsive to Rep Ortiz and see where we are. Jennifer, your thoughts.
Thank you, Jennifer Harpel. I think I have some different perspectives on this one. First of all, it seems a lot different than the other recommendations, right? Mandating that two private parties include specific language in a contract is a lot different than, creating task force and studying things. So I see this as a lot different, and I don't understand the comments about it lessening litigation. To me, it just creates another avenue for litigation where folks can sue for breach of contract in addition to the protections that are already in place for the ADA and CADA. And the argument to me that this just says what's already required by law means that if it's already required by law, there's not a need to add it into private contracts. So those are the concerns that I would raise. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional thoughts? Lieutenant Governor, please.
Thanks. I'm busy eating my spaghetti here, as any good Italian would. Don't we, I mean, I've bought a few houses and a few cars and things like that. Don't we require certain things in housing contracts and auto purchases and things like, is this an unusual request? And I guess since Jennifer's the attorney and I'm not, maybe you can answer that, Jennifer.
I'm an employment attorney, so I will not profess to have a lot of knowledge about like housing contracts and that kind of thing. I mean, but a housing contract is between individuals. This is between two businesses, right? I guess I don't feel qualified to say more than that. But this does seem very different than the other recommendations that we're making. For, to just insert ourselves into these private contracts.
As a Rep. Ortiz, I'm gonna jump in. The answer is yes, of course we do. There's federal law that exists to protect workers. There's federal law that exists to protect certain type of nonprofits and certain type of companies. We do this already. The answer is yes. We clearly do this, whether it's housing or vehicles or whatever. We, like the federal, state government does influence contracting. What is different about this is that it's new. And I understand the trepidation with new, but if this wasn't an issue, I think a lot of us here wouldn't feel like we would have to do something. Like as if our basic access was already being considered in design, which evidence shows that clearly it is not, in equal footing as some of the other requests that the businesses are making, then we would not need to, or feel the need to do any of this. And so I hear that. The answer, Lieutenant Governor, is yes, we do this. We have done this. We will continue to do this. This is just an area where we're breaking new ground, and it's not unnecessary. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thought I saw another hand up, but it's gone down. Do we have other members who would like to offer comments? We've had some rather rigorous, but I think comprehensive discussion on this, and I hear general alignment. Not my place to say that, though. So given that, I am going to go to a roll call vote on this. The recommendation as written would be at time of contracting with any operator of a public or commercial recreational facility in Colorado, require the manufacturer of a passenger ropeway to acknowledge receipt of or having awareness of the ADA, CADA, and the applicable requirements as they relate to the subject matter of the contract. Putting some language in place that's responsive to what I hear from Rep. Ortiz and some others, I would suggest you add the sense that nothing in this is intended to require or facilitate the disclosure of proprietary or other confidential information. With that, I will ask for a roll call vote on this, going first to Mr. Ortiz.
Yes.
Ms. Moran.
Yes.
Ms. Jorgensen.
Yes.
Ms. Harpole.
No.
Mr. Stone.
Michael Stone, yes.
By a vote of 4-1, which does constitute a simple majority of a quorum present, this idea will advance. Ms. Harpole, you are invited, and I will follow up with you if you'd like to include any language about the dissent or the reason for your opposition or non-support of this. With that, I'm going to continue our discussion on the ski areas with the goal of getting through these today. And I'm going to push all of you to give me some considered thought on the general outdoor rec as we get ready for what will end up being a second outdoor rec meeting. Our next recommendation is to conduct reviews of recreational facilities access for and compatibility with the equipment of those using adaptive equipment. The problem may seem straightforward, but the group wants to share it, that there are continuous changes to the types of adaptive equipment used by individuals with a disability, and both natural and human-caused changes to the conditions of different outdoor recreation facilities. These can all cause changes or uncertainty in the ability of someone using adaptive equipment to access an outdoor recreation opportunity. As you hear that, I think this is where we do start to blur from strictly ski industry to general outdoor rec, so I want to name that. The intended end state the group is looking to create that there is an established process for assessing and improving the ability of individuals with a disability using adaptive equipment to access outdoor recreation sites and facilities. So the recommendation they bring forward to you was to encourage the relevant agency or agencies involved in regulating or oversight of recreation facilities to conduct a periodic review of an appropriate frequency. You see a lot of things for you still to decide, or for someone else, on what is appropriate and what is periodic, for assessing compatibility of adaptive equipment with any mechanisms involved in accessing outdoor recreation. They included some implementation notes. Number one, assessment should examine the adaptive equipment and the mechanisms for access. Two, you may want to consider useful life of equipment as one element. And three, that this should be considered in regulatory decision-making. Again, I want to name, this is where the discussion started segueing and expanding from strictly ski to general outdoor rec. You undoubtedly, based on the conversations of the last hour and a half, understand the connections to ski, but there were some specific examples when we talk about the ability of equipment and access limitations, whether that's the gate to a trail headway or mechanism for entering waterways. This was about what is known and how fast this equipment is evolving. Are there members that have clarifying questions or want to offer their initial thoughts on this idea? I will name that this passed by 6 yes votes and 1 abstention. Your silence could be support. Your silence could be confusion. It could be opposition and not sure who wants to go first. Mr. Stone, you know, you've had a chance to be in a lot of these conversations and are somewhere out there enjoying a lot of these opportunities. Your thoughts on this one?
Thank you. Michael Stone speaking. Actually, I'm fully in support of this. And I think it covers a great deal of ground. The only thing that gives me a little bit of pause, and I think that the subcommittee might have had something similar, is in the frequency of these inspections, and to find a way to button that up. I think that that's just an area that is, you know, is it annually, biannually, 5 years? You know, any of that is just to button that up a little bit.
And to that point, and I think you were on some of the conversations, they did struggle with exactly that. And are there different frequencies that would be required by different industries? And where they generally landed was it should be some periodic review of an appropriate frequency. It may be venue or facility specific, and that's going to need to be what they want was for the state agents to be directed to do this and to establish what is that appropriate periodic review. Rep. Ortiz.
That was Rep. Ortiz. I want to give further context, and I'm glad Mike Stone went first because it jogged my memory a little bit. Yeah, the discussion was around timeline, and I think the agreed upon for the most part was that no longer than 10 years. There were some that were like, well, it should be shorter than that, it should be 4 to 5 years, because you have some advances in adaptive sports equipment. And I hear that. I just didn't want to micromanage too much. I want to leave it, but I don't want it to be delayed. Like I don't want to micromanage, but I want to set a reasonable floor upon which the time has to be reviewed that most can agree to. So that was the nuance of the discussion there, is what's the floor, what is it? And I'm speaking from my experience, maybe Mike has something different, but in the 12 years that I've been hurt, I've seen little to no changes in recumbent bikes. In the 12 years that I've been hurt, I've only seen an improvement in the suspension of mountain bikes, but again, very little changes to some of the basic designs, maybe more utilization of electric motors as they become more compact and more efficient when it comes to mountain biking. I've seen very little changes to monoskis in the past 12 years. So that's why I recommended 10 years, but I didn't want to micromanage, but I want to create an expected floor so that disabled folks and adaptive athletes don't just get changes to their equipment ignored if and when they happen.
Thank you, Rep. Ortiz. Any questions or comments for consideration by your colleagues? Then with that, I will read it again and we'll go to a roll call vote. The recommendation is to encourage the relevant agencies or agencies involved in regulating or oversight of recreational facilities to conduct a periodic review of an appropriate frequency for assessing compatibility of adaptive equipment with any mechanisms involved in accessing outdoor recreation. Their implementation notes included assessment should examine the adaptive equipment and the mechanisms of access, to consider the useful life of equipment as one element, and that this should be considered in regulatory decision-making. With that, we'll go to a roll call vote, and to keep it interesting, I'll switch it up. Michael Stone.
Michael Stone, yes.
Jennifer Harpole.
Yes.
Hillary Jorgensen.
Yes.
Elizabeth Moran.
Yes.
Representative Ortiz.
Yes.
By unanimous vote of a quorum present, the idea advances as a recommendation. And now I go back and I mix it up again. We're going to start at the general recreation. And I do believe we've got time for at least one, if not two. We're going to go to some of the meaty ones. Background here, we're going to talk about parking. This started when we were talking about parking at ski resorts and the challenges we heard from individuals with a disability of where the drop-off point was, where parking was, where you could unload or load with adaptive equipment and the challenges there. We then, over a series of months, ended up having that same conversation, that when you get to different recreation facilities, there's sometimes no designated parking, there's limited parking, the parking is too small, particularly if you're unloading equipment or have a large accessible van. So a big conversation then led to conversations about what is labeled handicap parking, what we talk about as accessible parking. And with the growth of Colorado, our population overall, which those of us who have been here for a while have seen it more than double, as well as the boom in the use of outdoor recreation. So what they identified that was with our growth and the growing participation in outdoor recreation, particularly by Coloradans with the disabilities, parking spaces available and the systems for them don't meet the needs. What the group wants to see as an efficient and effective system for ensuring parking, loading or unloading for individuals with disabilities at the widest possible set of outdoor recreation facilities that gives attention to the point of access, the ability to load or unload equipment, and the use of accessible vans. So they've got a 4-point recommendation. It starts with directing an appropriate state agency or office to conduct a comprehensive analysis of the current accessible parking conditions in Colorado with input of those with lived experience as an individual with disability and with relevant professional experience. The analysis should give specific consideration to the following. Number one, the number, size, and other requirements for accessible parking with attention to the increased population, growth of participation in all forms of recreation by Coloradans with a disability, and the needs for loading and unloading from vehicles. Number two, the current systems for enforcement of the use of placards and accessible parking spaces. Number three, the needs and opportunity for dedicated drop-off or unloading locations where entrance adjacent accessible parking is limited or not available. Other issues related as identified by the group, they offer a note that the Colorado Disability Funding Committee has a disability parking fund that could be a partner, could be the lead or a resource in this work. I want to emphasize this came about as kind of the consolidation of what were 7 or 8 ideas the group was considering. They talked about requiring shuttles from drop-off points. They talked about should we require different numbers of spaces at different entrances. Where they landed after discussion was there really needs to be a more comprehensive and strategic long-term approach to look at what's happening and what needs to happen. I do want to note we have an item from DNR here, Department of Natural Resources. Their comment is as follows. Disability parking is a complex issue with existing federal and state requirements. This would require resources to implement, and depending on the scope, could have significant cost. Training of all parking lot owners, individuals with a disability parking tags, and law enforcement would be needed if any parking laws are changed. The Colorado Disability Funding Committee, under the Colorado Disability Opportunity Office at CDLE, has a disabled parking education and enforcement fund. DNR is generally neutral on this recommendation. DNR acknowledges that finding parking, unloading, and loading adaptive equipment and accessing trails through gates or entryways close to parking lots represent major challenges and barriers to recreation. Assuming this comprehensive analysis includes all municipal, county, state, and federal lands that have parking areas for recreational access, conducting the analysis will require resources and a central coordinating public body. I will only note that I don't believe anything DNR offers is at odds with what the subcommittee discussed or has put forward to you. That's not me offering an opinion. That's me offering you what I heard as your facilitator. Does anyone want to offer thoughts or have clarifying questions on what I recognize is a bit of a meaty recommendation that distills down to, let's look at what we're doing with our parking and if it makes sense for our actual needs? Mr. Stone, you're coming off mute, so I'm inviting you into the conversation.
Thank you, Michael Stone speaking. There's a little internal humor because I've seen this theme from the beginning. I happen to be on that disability funding committee, and I know that Josh Winkler who's also on this call is got to be smiling about the workload that's being imposed by this meeting alone on that committee. But it's always a difficult when the implying of resources, which is extremely vague on this. What went into this after sitting on several of these subcommittee meetings, the outdoor subcommittee, was a tremendous amount of lived experience. It was very consistent, anybody who participated, on why this was a need. And it sounds like DNR agrees that there in fact is a need and such. What we're trying to do is bring this to the attention that due to the growth and obviously every third person seems to have a placard and it is creating more and more barriers for basic access. What this statement and this recommendation does is in fact move this forward. And I think it's very, very important for us all to remember that there was a tremendous amount of discussion, so much lived experience specific to these needs, examples after examples after examples, and in a variety of areas around the state where this is extremely important. So once again, I'm going to just go for this and say that I am in favor.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone else have clarifying questions or thoughts you'd like your colleagues to consider as we potentially move to a vote on this? Seeing and hearing none, I'm going to take that silence as a desire for a roll call vote, and we're going to go there. We'll keep rolling along. Mr. Stone, I think you told me, but I'm going to go to you first for an official vote. You were on mute, but I interpreted that as yes.
Michael Stone, yes. Sorry.
Jennifer.
Yes.
Hillary.
Yes.
Elizabeth.
Yes.
Representative Ortiz.
Yes.
By unanimous vote of those present, which constitute a quorum, recommendation that was 3 will move forward, recommending the creation of the comprehensive analysis on parking conditions. We have 4 more. I will tell you, we're not getting through all 4, but we'll narrow down how many I hound you to do a survey on. I'm going to move to recommendation 4. The short title is to require a point of contact for individuals with disabilities. The problem this stemmed from was that it can be challenging for an individual with a disability to find information or a point of contact at recreational facilities to help them navigate or understand the accessibility features or limitations of that facility. And the intended end state is very clear. It's simple to find the contact information for an individual at a staffed recreation facility who can provide that information. So what the group has recommended to you is that we require recreational site managers or operators, important to hear this next phrase, of staffed facilities to have and publish online in an easy to find and accessible location, and at the location in plain language in easy to find locations, a point of contact and contact information to help individuals with disabilities navigate and access recreation facilities or to express concerns. And I will just read again DNR's comment on this one. They say DNR currently strives to meet a similar standard. CPW, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, has a dedicated ADA coordinator who focuses on public access, Title II of the ADA. DNR has an ADA coordinator that focuses on Title I and also on assisting all other divisions. Additionally, DNR has an easy-to-remember email address, accessdnr@state.co.us, posted on its website where anyone can email a question, concern, or request, as well as phone numbers for the appropriate staff. DNR can easily post this information at DNR and CPS managed sites. Without giving any weight or opinion to that, I do want to mention we have Wendy Padilla from DNR on the call here if we have questions. I want to acknowledge that DNR has been particularly accessible and available to this committee. They sent members regularly, whether that was the folks working on CoTrex, which is dealing with our trails, or DNR and CPW. So they've been an active partner to the subcommittee as they had their conversations. Rep. Ortiz, your thoughts on this recommendation?
Yeah, I don't know if we specifically need to mention this too, and I'll defer to my other members of the executive committee, is we should encourage existing bodies that rate difficulty of certain outdoor activities to be involved, because the intent of this is not only to list whether, yes, parking is accessible, we have accessible bathrooms in this area, we have an accessible entrance for the trail, but also the grade or difficulty of the trail itself. For example, like we do in skiing areas. Whether I'm a monoskier or not, when I see a green circle, I know what I'm getting. When I see a blue cube, I know what I'm getting. When I see a single black diamond, I know what I'm getting. And so I've had several meetings about this, and there are private companies that also want to be involved. I just don't, and I'm not saying this is what their intent is, I just don't want to have to get gouged or pay for that. Like if there are national associations that are already rating difficulties of bike trails, for example, or climbing routes that currently exist when it comes to mountain biking and climbing, then access should be considered in that, and we can work with them on creating a standard on how this is rated. For example, like some disabled riders will need two-wheel track surface to be able to navigate that trail. Some high-level paraplegic or low-level paraplegics do not, if they have the right kind of equipment. They, in fact, some of them want the difficulty of a single trailhead, even though they have two wheels that are 3 feet apart, depending on how steep the slope is, right? Like, and that's kind of where some of this information is coming from too, is that I show up, know what's accessible by accessible features, but also know what's accessible by the skill set I have given the equipment that I have, just at a glance. And that's kind of the intent of this, is we go to this park knowing what kind of access I'm going to have and what kind of difficulties I'm going to encounter.
I'm going to jump in because Rep. Ortiz got just slightly ahead of us. Rep. Ortiz, we were on idea 3, which is the contact information, but this does blend right into the one you're talking about, recommendation 6, which is to require the publication of accessibility features and limitations. And that recommendation, and then we'll talk about both of these and see about a vote on both of them. But that's to require managers or operators of recreational facilities to publish and make available in multiple accessible formats the information and descriptions about the accessibility features and any limitations of trails, facilities, equipment, parking, and other elements. And then one of the best practices for the implementation that they note is that based on the features, a rating system should be utilized using a scalar system that is accessible and provides details about the features and limitations. So kind of two sides of the same issue, and that's individuals with a disability knowing what to expect at a facility. One recommendation, recommendation 3, is to require that they provide a point of contact that an individual could reach out to find out this information. The other recommendation that Rep. Ortiz was highlighting is that they publish and make available specific and clear information about what the features and limitations are. And they had conversations, Rep. Ortiz kind of alluded to this, Michael was part of these, you know, tell me, am I going to be able to access this trail the whole way? Or at 500 yards, a half a mile into it, is there a boulder that blocks that trail? Is the trail fully accessible except that gate that's only 30 inches wide and my bike can't get through that? So we've got two different ideas getting at the same thing, which is awareness, access to information, one for the point of contact being easy to find, one for the details. I will say that someone mentioned when we were talking initially, I want full disclosure, somebody said, could we do the same thing as ski resorts with blue, green, black? And that was adjusted because of the accessibility challenges with those colors and with that system. So this is that a rating system could be developed. So we're talking about recommendation 4 for the point of contact and recommendation 6 about publishing those features. And Hillary, I'm sorry to talk so long while you've had your hand up. I just wanted to offer the clarity, but jump in.
Yeah, thank you, and no noise for that. Just gave me some little things to think about. So I am very supportive of requiring contact information. I think that is best practice for every single office, entity, department, and government that deals with the public. So highly supportive of that. I am supportive of the other recommendation, and I just have a lot of questions about logistics. Meaning, like, I have a whale-film autism. My access needs are really different than someone who is a wheelchair user, and, there are lots of different kinds of disabilities that may, engender the use of a wheelchair, which results in different sort of physical, capabilities. My needs are different from someone who deaf, blind, neurodiverse, etc. And so, yeah, I am certainly with the same thing, kind of that the committee did around just like, how do you ever have a list? Because I think it would have to be like 18 pages long.
And Hillary, I will tell you, there was another committee on housing that had a conversation about publishing accessibility features and limitations. They ended up coming up with the idea of a checklist of what all of those are. So there's been different approaches by the different committees. If we could, I want to stay focused on the point of contact, and we may do a vote there, and then we'll see where we get on this disclosure and publishing of information. Does anyone have additional thoughts on the point of contact recommendation, which is Rec 4? Mr. Ortiz.
Actually, I saw Jennifer's hand up first, so I'm gonna let her go first.
Thank you, Jennifer. I apologize for me. I'm looking back and forth between screens. Jump in.
You're fine. My hand sign is slow to publish. I just have a question, and I know you just asked us to focus on 4, but it goes to both of them. Like, so 4 is staffed recreational facilities. 6 is all recreational facilities, I think. Do we have a definition? I am not sure I understand what those encompass.
So I think it's a fair point. Yes, there is a distinction. 4, when the point of contact, they narrowed it to staffed facilities. So they did not intend that to cover, say, a CPW trail that may be occasionally maintained, but there's no staff on site. They did intend it to mean those facilities where there's a park ranger or Parks and Rec staff on site. To your question on item 6 of require managers or operators of recreational facilities, there was no discussion of how we are defining that. So I think it's a valid point for this group to consider. Do you want to define that? Is there a need to?
Thank you. And because, I mean, Parks and Rec, I understand that, but I assume this also applies to private, right? Private recreational facilities?
That language does not specifically name that, but I will tell you from the conversations, that was their intent.
Okay.
Both government and private sector managed recreation facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Rep. Ortiz.
Yeah, super supportive of this. I'm ready to take a vote on it. My only concern that I'll bring up to the rest of the group is whether it's private or public, I'm always concerned about separate but not equal points of contact. You see this with car rental companies. You see this, which, I passed laws to try and get rid of. Like, I don't want to micromanage, but also, like, I don't want them to be like, oh, well, this is our basic access person, even though they're only working 2 days a week. We'll just make them the POC, and they'll get to them when they get to them. You know what I mean? So I'm just very concerned about this idea of separate and definitely not equal POC versus making sure the person that is already the POC for able-bodied folks also has a section of their training that covers what they're expected to know and what information they're expected to give when it comes to basic access and folks with disabilities.
Appreciate that. And I know we're going to have a conversation about training and individuals. So maybe we can also bring that up there. If it's okay, I'm going to go to a vote on the point of contact. Again, recommendation 4, that require recreational site managers or operators of staffed facilities to have and publish online in an easy to find and accessible location and at the location in plain language and easy to find locations, a point of contact and the contact information to help individuals with disabilities navigate and access recreational facilities or to express concerns. We'll handle these two separately and we'll go to a roll call, starting with David Ortiz.
Yes.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
Hillary,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Michael.
Michael Stone, yes.
By unanimous vote of the members present who do constitute a quorum, the recommendation number 4 to require a point of contact will move forward as a recommendation. Let me check in on recommendation 6, which is to require the managers or operators of recreational facilities. And as Jennifer questioned, this should be interpreted as you consider this to mean public and private, so government or private sector facilities, to publish and make available in multiple accessible formats information and descriptions about the accessibility features and any limitations of trails, facilities, equipment, parking, and other elements for the location. Your subcommittee provided a best practice for implementation that based on the features, a rating system should be utilized using a scalar system that is accessible and provides details about the features and limitations. I'm not going to rush the vote if you're not ready because we do have several items, but is there anyone who is not ready to vote on this item? Hillary.
Sorry, I just am still trying to wrap my head around the electricity and everything, and I don't want to know how perspective we want to get, but I really like the idea of like a checklist, and maybe that's the system that's referenced in this recommendation. I just am still struggling with the logistics.
No, that's totally fine. And look, we have 2 minutes. I don't want to rush this. Carrie, what I'm going to ask you to do is reduce our survey down to items 1, 2, 6, and 7. I'm going to ask members to provide some comments on just those items for our next conversation. I am in awe of all of you getting through as many items as we did today, so I want to thank you. We will resend that survey with just the ask for where you stand, but particularly your comments on those items. The first 2 that we talked through, some on urban and suburban, specifically comments, and then these last few that we didn't get a chance to go through, items 6 and 7. We will also be sending you the housing survey. My plea with you, it's not just an ask, it's me pleading, is to complete both of those surveys by the end of the day Friday, to let us know where you are on each of those, if you've got specific comments on them, so that when we get back together, we can crank through housing, we can deal with remaining recreation, we can all go have a good holiday and then come back and talk about fun things like government and rewriting CADA. With that, I will turn to Rep. Ortiz and Lieutenant Governor. I'll just give you my sincere thanks for today's conversation. Representative Ortiz, you first, and then Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody on this committee for all the strong work they've done. For those that were on the subcommittees that chose to attend and were listening in, thank you. Wouldn't be at this point without you. And this should go without saying, but you can't say it enough. Carrie and Barrick, thank you so much for all of your hard work in facilitating and organizing the subcommittees and us as well. So I'm really proud of everything that has taken shape and happening so far. Thank you all.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor.
Well, I think Rep. Ortiz forgot to thank one person, and that was himself, because without him, we wouldn't have this legislation to work on and implement. So I'm going to miss you in the legislature, Rep. Ortiz. I've said it before, I'll say it again. And I just want to thank you for your work and your advocacy on behalf of the community. And thanks to everybody else. This has taken a lot of time. I don't think we pay you for any of your efforts, but hopefully we can move the needle, and Colorado will be the most accessible state in the union.
Thank you all. We will chase you by email, and we will see you or speak with you next week when we get into housing. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all. Bye.